Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. 9/11. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Privrajacharya Statara Satta Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Hari Hari Bol. Om Vishnu Krishna Shrimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pisharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyatishatarine. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 9, entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge, and it's verse number 11, about these mūḍhās. Avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, paraṁ bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram, avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, param bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram. Avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, param bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram. Avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, param bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram. Avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, param bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram. Ladies? Avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, param bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram. Avajānanti mūḍhā, mānuṣīṁ tanum āśritam, param bhāvam ajānanto, mama bhūta-maheśvaram. Word meanings: avajānanti, deride; mam, me; mūḍhāḥ, foolish men; mānuṣīṁ, in a human form; tanum, a body; āśritam, assuming; param, transcendental; bhāvam, nature; ajānantaḥ, not knowing; mama, my; bhūta, of everything that be; mahā-īśvaram, the Supreme Proprietor. Translation: Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. Please repeat. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. So before I read Srila Prabhupada's wonderful purport, just a little introduction. You may recall in chapter 7, there were 4 kinds of miscreants that don't surrender to Kṛṣṇa. One who surrenders to Kṛṣṇa can easily cross beyond the material nature, but 4 kinds don't surrender to Kṛṣṇa. They're duskritina, they're miscreants, bad actors. And the first one is the mūḍhā. And the mūḍhā is a person who's grossly foolish. So in this purport, Srila Prabhupada discusses 2 kinds of mūḍhās, actually. And I'm going to ask you all to listen. It's a long purport. And then tell me afterwards who are the 2 kinds that he discusses. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. From the other explanations of the previous verses in this chapter, it is clear that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although appearing like a human being, is not a common man. The personality of Godhead, who conducts the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the complete cosmic manifestation, cannot be a human being. So in the previous verses in this chapter, Kṛṣṇa describes how in his unmanifested form, he pervades the entire universe, everything is in him, and yet everything is not in him. Everything comes out of him at the beginning of creation, goes back into him at the end of creation, and that all this work doesn't bind him, and that material nature is working under his supervision, completely under his control. So how can he be a common man? The personality of Godhead, who conducts the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the complete cosmic manifestation, cannot be a human being. I just repeated that. Yet there are many foolish men who consider Kṛṣṇa to be merely a powerful man and nothing more. Actually, he is the original Supreme Personality, as confirmed in the Brahma-saṁhitā, īśvaraḥ paramaḥ kṛṣṇaḥ. He is the Supreme Lord. There are many īśvaras, controllers, and one appears greater than another. In the ordinary management of affairs in the material world, we find some official or director, and above him there is a secretary, and above him a minister, and above him a president. Each of them is a controller, but one is controlled by another. In the Brahma-saṁhitā, it is said that Kṛṣṇa is the supreme controller. There are many controllers undoubtedly, both in the material and spiritual world, but Kṛṣṇa is the supreme controller, īśvaraḥ paramah Kṛṣṇaḥ. His body is Satchidananda, non-material. Material bodies cannot perform the wonderful acts described in previous verses. His body is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. Although he is not a common man, the foolish deride him and consider him to be a man. His body is called here mānuṣīm because he is acting just like a man, a friend of Arjuna's, a politician involved in the battle of Kurukshetra. In so many ways, he is acting just like an ordinary man, but actually his body is Satchidananda Vigraha, eternal bliss and knowledge absolute. This is confirmed in the Vedic language also, Satchidananda Rupaya Kṛṣṇāya. I offer my obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kṛṣṇa, who is the eternal blissful form of knowledge. Gopal Tapani Upanishad 1:1. There are other descriptions in the Vedic language also. Tamekang Govindam. You are Govinda, the pleasure of the senses and the cows. Satchidananda Vigraham, and your form is transcendental, full of knowledge, bliss, and eternality. Gopala Upanishad 1:35. Despite the transcendental qualities of Lord Krishna's body, it's full of bliss and knowledge. There are many so-called scholars and commentators of the Bhagavad-Gita who deride Krishna as an ordinary man. The scholar may be born an extraordinary man due to his previous good work, but this conception of Sri Krishna is due to a poor fund of knowledge. Therefore, he is called mūḍhā. For only foolish persons consider Krishna to be an ordinary human being. The foolish consider Krishna an ordinary human being because they do not know the confidential activities of the Supreme Lord and his different energies. They do not know that Krishna's body is a symbol of complete knowledge and bliss, that he is the proprietor of everything that be, and that he can award liberation to anyone. Because they do not know that Krishna has so many transcendental qualifications, they deride him. Nor do they know that the appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in this material world is a manifestation of his internal energy. He is the master of the material energy, as has been explained in several places. Mama maya duratyaya. He claims that the material energy, although very powerful, is under his control, and whoever surrenders unto him can get out of the control of this material energy. If a soul surrendered to Krishna can get out of the influence of material energy, then how can the Supreme Lord, who conducts the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the whole cosmic nature, have a material body like us? So this conception of Krishna is complete foolishness. Foolish persons, however, cannot conceive that the personality of Godhead, Krishna, appearing just like an ordinary man, can be the controller of all the atoms and of the gigantic manifestation of the universal form. The biggest and the minutest are beyond their conception, so they cannot imagine that a form like that of a human being can simultaneously control the infinite and the minute. Actually, although he is controlling the infinite and the finite, he is apart from all this manifestation. It is clearly stated concerning his yogam-aśvaram, his inconceivable transcendental energy, that he can control the infinite and the finite simultaneously, and that he can remain aloof from them. Although the foolish cannot imagine how Krishna, who appears just like a human being, can control the infinite and the finite, those who are pure devotees can accept this, for they know that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, they completely surrender unto him and engage in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord. They're called Mahatmas, as will be discussed in a couple of verses. There are many controversies between the impersonalists and the personalists about the Lord's appearance as a human being. But if we consult Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the authoritative texts for understanding the science of Krishna, then we can understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is not an ordinary man, although he appeared on this earth as an ordinary human. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 1st chapter, when the sages headed by Shaunaka inquired about the activities of Krishna, they said, Kritavan kila karmani saharamena keshavaha atimartyani bhagavan gudha katpata manuṣāḥ. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with Balaram, played like a human being, and so masked, he performed many superhuman acts. Bhagavatam 1:120. The Lord's appearance as a man bewilders the foolish. No human being could perform the wonderful acts that Krishna performed while he was present on this earth. When Krishna appeared before his father and mother, Vasudeva and Devaki, he appeared with 4 hands, but after the prayers of the parents, he transformed himself into an ordinary child. As stated in the Bhagavatam 10:346, Babhuva prakritak shishuhu. He became just like an ordinary child, an ordinary human being. Now, here again, it is indicated that the Lord's appearance as an ordinary human being is one of the features of his transcendental body. In the 11th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita also, it is said that Arjuna prayed to see Krishna's form of 4 hands, Tenaiva Rupena Chaturbhujena. After revealing this form, Krishna, when petitioned by Arjuna, again assumed his human-like form, Manuṣīṁ Rupam. These different features of the Supreme Lord are certainly not those of an ordinary human being. Some of those who deride Krishna and who are infected with the Mayavadi philosophy quote the following verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 3:29-21 to prove that Kṛṣṇa is just an ordinary man. Ahang sarveshu bhūteshu bhūtātmā vastitah sada. The Supreme is present in every living entity. We should take better note of this particular verse from the Vaishnava acharyas like Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, instead of following the interpretation of unauthorized persons who deride Kṛṣṇa. This chapter 29 of the third canto, Lord Kapila-Deva is explaining to Devahuti about devotional service, and he's talking about how the genuine devotee has to see that Kṛṣṇa is in everyone's heart and not just worship Kṛṣṇa as a separatist, thinking that he'll give me some benediction and not others. He says that if you worship the deity in the temple, even following all the rules and regulations, but if you don't appreciate how Kṛṣṇa is present in everyone's heart, it's like pouring oblations onto ashes. So anyway, it's funny that impersonalists will take these verses about how Kṛṣṇa is the person in everyone's heart, where Lord Kapila-Deva is explaining about devotional service and devotional service in the mode of ignorance, in the mode of passion, in the mode of goodness, and then pure devotional service. It's strange that they would take that to mean that Kṛṣṇa is not a person. After all, who can we be devoted to who's not a person? Jiva Goswami, commenting on this verse, says that Kṛṣṇa, in his plenary expansion as Paramatma, is situated in the moving and non-moving entities as the Supersoul. So any neophyte devotee who simply gives his attention to the Archamurti in the form of the Supreme Lord in the temple and does not respect other living entities is uselessly worshipping the form of the Lord in the temple. There are three kinds of devotees of the Lord, and the neophyte is in the lowest stage. The neophyte gives more attention to the deity in the temple than to other devotees. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur warns that this sort of mentality should be corrected. A devotee should see that because Kṛṣṇa is present in everyone's heart as Paramatma, everybody is the embodiment or the temple of the Supreme Lord. So as one offers respects to the temple of the Lord, he should similarly properly respect each and every body in which the Paramatma dwells. Everyone should therefore be given proper respect and should not be neglected. There are also many impersonalists who deride temple worship. They say that since God is everywhere, why should one restrict himself to temple worship? But if God is everywhere, is he not in the temple or in the deity? Although the personalist and the impersonalist will fight with one another perpetually, a perfect devotee in Kṛṣṇa consciousness knows that although Kṛṣṇa is the Supreme Personality, he is all-pervading, as confirmed in the Brahma-saṁhitā. Although his personal abode is Goloka Vrindavan, and he is always staying there, by his different manifestations of energy and by his plenary expansion as Supersoul, he is present everywhere in all parts of the material and spiritual creation. Om Ajnanatimrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militangina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti-vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Okay, so who wants to tell me what two kinds of mūḍhās were discussed in this purport? Okay, Jagarini.
Foolish scholars and mayavadis.
Foolish scholars and mayavadis. Anyone else? Nobody wants to add anything? So foolish scholars, in particular foolish scholars who think that Kṛṣṇa is an ordinary man. Sometimes people think, oh, maybe there was a great prince and because they're limited in their conception of what can actually happen. They don't believe in stories of big giant snake demons and people lifting up a whole mountain and things like that. But they think, oh, there must have been some powerful prince who was similar to what powerful princes are like today. And then people built up legends around him. Some scholars will say like that. And they don't understand Bhagavad-Gita at all. Because of their atheistic mentality, they can't enter into the beauty of this philosophy of Bhagavad-Gita, this philosophy which gives real knowledge. Real knowledge which means, as described by Kṛṣṇa in chapter 13, knowledge means simplicity, pridelessness, accepting a bona fide spiritual master, worship of the Supreme Lord, being equipoised in happiness and distress. You know, these in verses, 13, 8 through 12, something like that. There's a description of what knowledge is. So they don't have knowledge. They're foolish persons. Mūḍhās are described in chapter 7 when Prabhupada is describing the 4 kinds of miscreants who don't surrender to Kṛṣṇa. He describes them like an ass, a beast of burden. They're simply so dull that they're busy. You know, they may be a big scholar as a professor in a university, but where do they really live? What's their real desire? They want to have prestige. They want to be, lauded as very intelligent. They want to have a good job or get, good publications, get good money, and have good sense gratification. They can go out to fancy restaurants and eat unmentionable things, and they want to have a beautiful wife and so many other things, just like anyone else. They're supposedly big philosophers, but they haven't developed the qualities that Kṛṣṇa describes as the hallmarks of knowledge. So Prabhupada says it's like an ass. He has a master beating him, and at night he's always afraid, and in the day he's always afraid, and he's just carrying things and pulling things and doing all these things so he won't get beaten, and then his master gives him a little grass, and he's satisfied with that. So even one may be a big scholar, or one may not be a scholar, but just be a gross materialist who doesn't believe in God and can't conceive of how Kṛṣṇa can actually be controlling the entire universe, although in a human form, controlling the modes of nature, all working under him. All these descriptions that are given in the Bhagavad-Gita itself and in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in so many prayers by so many great sages and great personalities, they can't conceive of that. And so where do they really live? They don't get the joy of devotional service and surrendering to Kṛṣṇa, and they can't understand Bhagavad-Gita at all. They hear, even some, I remember when I was a teenager, not even a teenager, younger than it, because I joined the Hare Krishna movement when I was 17, but even younger, I read some books from Indian yogis and things, and one book was describing many great masters that had different mystic powers and different things like that, and then they described how Kṛṣṇa was a great master who gave wise teachings to Arjuna, and it's like, what? Kṛṣṇa's not just another, master like the guy who could make perfume come out of his body or something, or never had to sleep. Kṛṣṇa is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's one kind of grossly foolish person. Srila Prabhupada is explaining, in fact, in the introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada explains that there's a distinction between the conception of Bhagavan and the conception of īśvaraḥ. Īśvaraḥ is often translated as God, controller. But, Shiva is Maheshwara, the great īśvaraḥ. Indra is an īśvaraḥ. Donald Trump is an īśvaraḥ of some kind. People, who control some business or something like that. Narendra Modi is an īśvaraḥ. But he's not the absolute truth. He's not the ultimate Supreme Personality of Godhead. Īśvara paramah Kṛṣṇa. He's the highest īśvara, the īśvara, the Deva Deva Jagatpate, the īśvara that all other īśvaras are subordinate to. And he's actually the tattva of the absolute, non-dual absolute truth. Brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. It's understood, it's heard by this padanti tat tattva vidas. By those who actually know the absolute truth, they know it in 3 features, as the impersonal Brahman, and the localized Paramatma, who's in everyone's heart, and also Bhagavan. So, who wants to elaborate more on the other kind of the mūḍhās, the Mayavadis? Is there anyone? I like to encourage back and forth discussion, but not only Jagarini, she's the only one bold enough. The Mayavadis, actually, if you look at chapter, what I like to do when I study the Gita is also to try to group the verses and see like what points are being made in this verse from this to this and this to that. So in the 9th chapter, the first couple of verses is an introduction, Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam. He explains how it's about devotional service. He's explaining this chapter, the most confidential knowledge, is about his devotional service, about how we can be his devotee. And then he starts describing in verse 4 about how he pervades the universe in his unmanifested form, and yet everything doesn't rest in him, it comes out of him, and then behold his opulence. He can be both the source of everything and also the resting place of everything. And he talks about how the universes are being created and destroyed automatically by him, without binding him at all, and without any effort on his part. He's describing all that. And that goes up to chapter 9, verse 9, and then verse 10. He's saying, the entire material manifestation is working under me. And now he's shifting a little bit, and he's describing those mūḍhās who don't understand anything like this about him, and they don't understand that Mama bhūta-maheśvaram, that he's the Lord of all beings. They don't understand this, his transcendental nature, param bhāvam. Excuse my cough. So then he's describing in the next verse how, because they're deluded by these atheistic views, then all their hopes for knowledge and liberation and anything good will just be destroyed because of this, because of their delusion. And then he describes those who are not deluded, who aren't mūḍhās, they're not deluded, they're the Mahatmas, and they worship Kṛṣṇa, they accept him, they're under the control of his divine energy, his internal energy, and they are always chanting his glories and bowing down to him and worshiping him with all their hearts and great happiness. And so this is the verse, verses 13 and 14 give us a sense of the ultimate, the ultimate teaching here that he will come back to in verse 22 through the end about devotional service. This is this chapter. Actually, Indradumna Swami told me that one time he was distributing Bhagavad-Gitas in France, in Paris, and he was near some important building, palace, where government things were taking place, and some big commotion was going on. All these big military officers and politicians were entering into the palace. So being a bold Sankirtan devotee, he ran up and distributed a book to one admiral. He was like a chief admiral in the French Navy, and he was talking to him, and the admiral was very interested. He was distributing in his dhoti and everything, and he was clearly a devotee, and the admiral had some interest in this. And he said he would like to meet the author of the book, who Indradumna Swami was glorifying. And Indradumna Swami said, well, as a matter of fact, my Gurudev, Srila Prabhupada, is in Marseille, and tonight I'm driving down there. Now, from Paris to Marseille, it's probably like an 11, 12-hour drive or something like that. I don't know, very long, at least in those days. Maybe there's a big superhighway now. And he said, if you'd like to meet him, you can come and drive. And the admiral said, yes, I would. I get my family. He got his wife and his children, and they took Indradumna Swami, and they all drove down and met Srila Prabhupada. And the admiral asked Srila Prabhupada, he bought the book, but he said, and he really liked meeting Prabhupada, but he said, this is a very big book. Can you just tell me one chapter I could read to get the essence of this book? And Prabhupada said, read chapter 9. So that was a long walk. That's what we call a long walk. I told that whole story, but it's about how the importance of chapter 9. So the one kind of the mūḍhā just thinks that the way we see material, the way we see the ordinary course of things in nature is the way everything must be. One time I heard a radio program with the astronomer Carl Sagan, and he said that what fascinated him, even as a child, was that at the farthest star in the farthest galaxy, all the laws of physics were exactly the same as they are here on Earth. And this was like his, and of course he's wrong about that. But that was some impetus for him to become a material scientist and study that way. And people who think in terms of these material laws, they have a hard time understanding, how Kṛṣṇa could appear with 4 hands and jewels and helmet and earrings, and then become a little baby and just like a human being and still control everything. So they're actually, in spite of their big intelligence about, all the things that astronomers know about and other scientists know about, they don't have knowledge as Kṛṣṇa is describing it in Bhagavad-Gita. And that essential knowledge is knowledge of who is God, who is Kṛṣṇa, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Not just one īśvara among many īśvaras, but the īśvara paramaḥ, the Supreme īśvara. And that he can appear like a human being. He can do anything. And he can exchange loving devotional service with his devotees. And Kṛṣṇa is recommending that in chapter 9. That's what chapter 9 recommends. Whatever you do, whatever austerities you perform, whatever you offer in sacrifice, whatever charity you give, make it as an offering to me. And in this way, you can cross over this material auspicious and inauspicious results, and you can actually come to me. And I'm really, of all the sacrifices, I'm the supreme enjoyer. I'll get to the Mayavadis, but in the next verse, after verse 14, when the description of the great Mahatmas is described, then Kṛṣṇa describes other kinds of transcendentalists, but they're not Mahatmas. Ekatvena pratakvena bahudha vishvatomukam. They worship Kṛṣṇa as the one without a second, the diverse in many, and the universal form. As Srila Prabhupada describes, they meditate on themselves as God, that's the lowest of them, or they make some non-God form, some imaginary form, and they consider that to be God, or they worship the Vedic pantheon or the demigods, or they worship the universe as God, which is described in Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, as the first step, the first chapter of the second canto. First step in God realization, we can start to see that the Absolute is personal by seeing the entire cosmic manifestation as a gigantic person. So, in those verses, then he says, but I am, they don't know that I, Kṛṣṇa, I am the healing herb, I am the fire, I am the butter, I am the chant, I am the sacrifice, I am the performer of the sacrifice, I am death personified, I give forth the rain, and I'm immortality, and these verses through like 18 or 19, he's describing that they're missing the point. They're not understanding Kṛṣṇa. Even those transcendentalists who worship him in different ways, they're not worshiping him tattvataḥ. They don't know him in truth. And then he talks about how those performers of Vedic sacrifice who aspire to go to heavenly planets, and they perform these sacrifices told in the Vedas, and they actually get to go to heavenly planets and enjoy vast sense gratification for a certain amount of time until their pious credit is used up, and then they fall down again. But then, again, verse 22, he talks about the devotees, that they're given his yoga kshemam, that he preserves what they have and carries what they lack, and that they don't fall down. And he goes on to explain that people misunderstand the Vedas. They misunderstand these Vedic rituals, that they perform these Vedic sacrifices, but they don't know that he's the actual ultimate enjoyer. They don't understand Kṛṣṇa, that bhoktaram yagitapasam sarva-loka-maheśvaram suhridam sarva-bhūtanam, and he's the friend of everyone. They don't understand these things, so they fall down again. Those who worship the demigods, they go to the demigods. Those who worship the ancestors go live the ancestors. Those who worship the ghosts and spirits, excuse me, they have to go live among such beings. But those who worship Kṛṣṇa come to Kṛṣṇa. And this devotional service is the purport of chapter 9, where Kṛṣṇa encourages everyone, manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mang namaskuru mame vaishyasyuktvaivam atmana matparayana. Again in chapter 18, when the great conclusion of Bhagavad-Gita is there, Kṛṣṇa then says, I'm going to disclose the most confidential of all confidential knowledge. And, the greatest secret of all secrets, and one who explains this to devotees is my dearmost servant. And what is that? It begins again with manmana bhava bhakto majaji mang namaskuru mame vaishasi satyang te pratijane priyosime. And then sarva dharman parityajya mame kang sharanang vraja. We all know these verses. So this is chapter 9. It shows how powerful devotional service is, that even if one makes a mistake on this path or does something abominable, if he continues in his devotional service, he should be considered saintly, and he very quickly achieves all righteousness. So the Mayavadis, they're Prabhupada's favorite stalking horse. He's here to save us from these Mayavadis. Nirvishesha shunyavadi paschatyadesh tarine. They're very prominent in Hinduism, isn't it? They don't understand Bhagavad-Gita. And if you look up Bhagavad-Gita on the internet or take a class on Bhagavad-Gita, at least half the time or more than half the time, you'll get someone who teaches you that when Kṛṣṇa says surrender to me, he doesn't really mean the person Kṛṣṇa, he means the unborn, unmanifested within him, and that Kṛṣṇa is not really a person. So they're stuck in this conception of Brahman realization. The Upanishads are they're transcendental Shabda Brahman, transcendental sound. They're not organized systematically into a philosophy. They're different, more poetic, and they explain so many different things. Here, the Gopal Tapani Upanishad, which is not one of the major Upanishads, it's there in the Atharva Veda, but it's all about Kṛṣṇa and how he's tending the cows and how he's the supreme controller, and his devotional service is the highest. But there are so many Upanishads, and then the Vedanta Sutra tries to organize it into a systematic philosophy, the wisdom of the Upanishads, but it's so densely packed into codes that it's very difficult to understand. One needs commentary to understand Vedanta Sutra. And the Mayavadi commentary misleads people. Lord Chaitanya's commentary was the Srimad Bhagavatam commentary that describes devotional service. It describes Kṛṣṇa as Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. He's a supreme person. He's non-dual because all of the expanse of his energies are non-different from him, and at the same time, he is the original source of those energies, right? Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Srila Prabhupada gave us this one Upanishad, Isha Upanishad, where Kṛṣṇa, where it's the author, Manu, whoever is speaking, is saying that Kṛṣṇa's true face is covered by his Hiranmayena Patrena, and he wants to kindly remove that veil of this dazzling effulgence so that I can see your actual form. So this is the real understanding, and it's clearly the teaching of Bhagavad-Gita. Anyone who studies Bhagavad-Gita, I'm a lawyer, so I read texts, I read constitutions, I read statutes, I read contracts, and they're supposed to be interpreted as a whole so that every part of it makes sense, and there are canons of judicial construction. When you read Srila Prabhupada's explanation, which is in line with the teaching of the Vaishnavacharyas, it's perfectly clear that Kṛṣṇa is saying that he's not, the impersonal Brahman who's taken a material form. In fact, in verse 724, he says that avyakting vyaktamāpanam manyate mam abhūdhāya paraṁ bhāvam ajānanto mamavyayam anuttamam. That those who think that I am the unmanifested and that I've taken this form are unintelligent. They don't know my higher nature as a person, my higher personal nature as Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is the last word in the absolute truth. There's his plenary expansion, Paramatma, who's in everyone's heart, and then there's his impersonal Brahman, the expansion of all his transcendental energy, which is non-dual, which is just described by Bhaktisiddhanta and by others, by Lord Brahma, as the effulgence, the halo of his personal form. So emphasis in Bhagavad-Gita is given on his personal form. That's why it's called Bhagavad-Gita. Bhagavan is the Supreme Person. So those who take the Bhagavad-Gita and try to X out the Bhagavan aspect of it and say that it's really a book about Brahman realization, because they've been misled by wrong commentaries on Vedanta, and they're attached to that wrong philosophy, so they try to shoehorn that into the Bhagavad-Gita, but it doesn't really fit. That's why Srila Prabhupada explains his Bhagavad-Gita is Bhagavad-Gita as it is. When we hear Bhagavad-Gita as described by the Vaishnavacharyas, as Kṛṣṇa explained it to Vivasvan, and it came down into cyclic succession, and as he again explained it to Arjuna, then we hear that Kṛṣṇa is a person, and that his devotional service is the highest thing. Pratyaksha bhagamang dharmyang susukam kartam avyayam. Avyayam means it's inexhaustible. It's not that you do it for some time and then you realize I am Kṛṣṇa, and so you stop worshiping or stop serving. That's a big mistake that Lord Chaitanya considers extremely offensive. So Prabhupada is mentioning those persons also in this verse, because Prabhupada has to very strongly attack that wrong philosophy, that wrong understanding of the Vedas, that wrong understanding of Bhagavad Gita, that wrong understanding of Vedanta, that wrong understanding. Even they tried to touch Srimad Bhagavatam and interpret Lord Kapiladev's. Chapter 39 of the third canto is such a beautiful chapter about devotional service. It's really about devotional service. And then they take this verse out of chapter 39 that Srila Prabhupada quotes in this purport, and they try to say that it means that since Krishna is in everyone's heart, then Krishna is not really a person. He's the unmanifested. They think that his body is different from. They don't understand that his Satchidananda body is not like he's an embodied soul, that he has a soul and then he's taken this body and he'll give it up and take another body. Yeah, he can take many forms. He can become Vraha, he can become Narasringadev, he can become Lord Ramachandra by his internal potency. But he's the original avatari is Krishna, but he can achieve any form he wants, and he can interact with his devotees personally. And he also says in this chapter that he's equal to everyone. That's another part about the science of God. Name dveshosti na priya, samoham sarvabhuteshu, name dveshosti na priya. Ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya, mayite teshu chapyaham. So he's really equal to everyone, but for those who approach him as mūḍhās and deride him, he destroys them. And those who approach him, that's how he's equal to them. That's how they approach him, so that's how he's equal to them. And then he doesn't hate them. He doesn't have any. This was described also in the purport, that he's aloof from the material creation. It's not like he's affected, even though he's creating everything and everything's under him. Bhaktisiddhanta explains that he's both transcendent and immanent. So immanent, there's always this big. Tell me if I'm losing you all, or if you have anyone who has any comments, please raise your hand. Sometimes I don't know whether I'm getting or say what I'm saying is pleasing or making enthusiastic. But immanence is the idea that God is present in everything, which he is. And transcendence is the idea that God is far beyond anything mundane. He's not touched by any mundane thing. So those who emphasize transcendence, just like Orthodox Muslims think it's a sin to make a picture of even the Saint Muhammad, or of certainly of Allah, because if he had a form, then he would be somehow be more like mundane, something mundane. So they don't understand transcendental form. And immanent means he's present in everything, yes, but that doesn't mean he's formless. It means by his plenary portion as Supersoul, he's the master of everyone's senses, Hrishikesha, and no one can feel anything, or when the soul wants to experience the material world, he has to have Krishna with him as Supersoul to be able to experience, and experience it. He exists as the overseer and permitter of all activities, and he arranges everything so that everything goes on properly in the world. Although he doesn't care, he doesn't have a horse in that race. He's not attached to one fruitive worker and hates another fruitive worker and everything. But his devotees, pure devotees, he becomes attracted to that. Because that's the relationship that we can have with him. And that's the ultimate goal of life, that pure devotional service. So I want more discussion. I hope someone has questions or comments, or otherwise, how do I know if, like when Lord Chaitanya was listening to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya for days and nights, 7 days, 8 days, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was explaining all this Mayavadi philosophy. And then finally, Lord Chaitanya was just sitting there patiently. And finally, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya got frustrated. You don't say anything. How do I know you understand what I'm saying? Lord Chaitanya said, well, I understand the verses of the Vedanta that you're quoting. I understand them perfectly well. But your explanations of them cloud their real meaning. Then we, what? No, how can you say that? I'm the great scholar. I'm Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Then Lord Chaitanya explained the real meaning, and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya could see that he was actually the personality of Godhead. Nobody could explain it so well. And so this is Vedanta. Bhagavad-Gita is Vedanta, and it's Bhakti Vedanta. Bhagavad-Gita is clearly a Bhakti scripture. It's not Bhakti avyayam. It's not Bhakti that you do sometime until you become elevated in the mode of goodness, and then you can give up Bhakti and meditate that you are yourself God, or that, the soul is like air within a pot, and when the pot is broken, it merges with the rest of the air. Kṛṣṇa says, you, me, all these kings, never was there a time when we did not exist, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. First person, second person, third person, past, present, and future, we're individuals. So I want to get some feedback, some discussion. Please, someone say something. And I'm not going to just depend on Jagarini to help me out, because she's my wife and she's always wants to help me. Come on. Somebody raise your hand. Nothing? Crickets? It makes me feel bad. Like I didn't succeed in reaching you somehow. Bhagavad-Gita is so nice. It explains Kṛṣṇa. It explains his devotional service. It glorifies that his devotional service is the ultimate goal of life. It clearly does that. And still, many, many people completely misunderstand it and give some Mayavadi explanation. So Prabhupada, he might not have had to say the Mayavadis are also mūḍhās in this chapter. He might not have had to discuss them also. But he has to make that point. This is his important point, to save everyone from this calamity. He wrote one prayer to Bhaktisiddhanta on Vyasa Puja. He said, impersonal calamity thou hast moved. What is it? Bhagavan is sentient, thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity thou hast moved. So this is Prabhupada's great contribution. This Bhagavad-Gita as it is, when people read it, they become convinced. They become devotees. And they can see clearly what it means. That Kṛṣṇa is clearly recommending devotional service. He's not recommending fruitive work. He's not recommending impersonal realization. In chapter 12, Arjuna asks directly, right? After he shows the whole universal form, it frightens Arjuna, then Arjuna wants to see the four-headed form. Then Kṛṣṇa reveals his more beautiful two-headed form, and Arjuna's mind is peaceful. And Kṛṣṇa says, even the demigods are always hankering to see this form, and you can't see it by Vedic study, you can't see it by sacrifice, you can't see it by anything other than pure devotional service. Bhaktya tvananya yashakya hame vangvidho Arjuna gyatang drastung tatpena praveshtung cha parantapa. So then, in chapter 12, a perfect segue, Arjuna says, well then, who's more perfect? Those who worship you in your personal form, or those who worship you as the avyaktam, right? Evang satata yukta ye bhaktas tvang paryupasate ye chap yaksharam avyaktam, as the infallible, as the unmanifested. Te shanke yoga vittama, which is better? And what does Kṛṣṇa say? Who knows what Kṛṣṇa says? Personal form. He says that's better. Maya veshimano yemang nitya yukta upasate shraddhaya parayopetas te me yukta tamamataha. They're the best. That's my opinion. They're better. Then he says that the others at last they can come to him after great difficulty. Sarvatra gama chintyang cha kutastam achalang dhruvam saniyam endriya gramang sarvatra sambhudhaya te prapnuvanti mameva sarvabhuta hite rataha. But he says, klesho dikataras te sham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukham dehavadbhir avapyate. That it's very difficult for them. It's very, very difficult. Klesho, for an embodied person to try to understand the impersonal, they have to undergo so much difficulty. And then because they're attached to this impersonal conception, it's hard for them to attain Kṛṣṇa. You know, te prapnuvanti mam. Yeah, mam, me, the person. Kṛṣṇa says, me, the person, me. All the time through the Bhagavad-Gita, he's saying, mam, surrender to me, think of me, worship me. Right? I told this imperishable science to the sun god. I remember all my lives. So then he says in verses 6 and 7 of chapter 12, he says, those who meditate on me, giving all their fruit of activity, yetu sarvani karmani, sanyasyat yatma chetasa, and teshamahang samudhartam, mrityu sangsara sagarat bhavami nachirat parta, maya veshita chetasam. Because of their thinking of me, I become the swift deliverer of them from the ocean of birth and death. He's clearly recommending, become my devotee. Don't bother with impersonal meditation. Yes, it's included. You understand Bhagavan, you will automatically understand Paramatma and Brahman. And then he says, what does he say? 12:8. His recommendation, Mayeva mana adhatsva mai buddhing niveshaya. Niveshishisi mayeva atta urdvam nasangshaya. This is his instruction. Engage your entire mind and intelligence completely being absorbed in me. Me, the person. And then you will come to me, without a doubt. That's Bhagavad-Gita. That's what he's saying. Then he says, if you can't do that, then by practicing regulative principles of bhakti-yoga, you can develop a desire for me. And if you can't do that, then try working for me. That by working for me, you can reach the perfectional stage. And he says, if you can't even work for me, then, you could give up the result of your fruitive activities and become self-situated, but better than that is cultivating knowledge, and better than that is meditation. So meditation on something impersonal comes way down below what Kṛṣṇa recommends. It's only for those who can't do the other higher activities of devotional service. Sometimes, Prabhupada points out, sometimes people... Jagrini, do you have your hand up?
Yep.
Okay, what do you...
There's about 5 minutes left. I was wondering if you could talk a little about Prabhupada's comment in the purport that seeing Kṛṣṇa only in the deity is an error and has to be corrected. And he actually goes so far as to say that you should respect every person as a temple of the Lord, as paramäh was residing there. So,
Yeah. So we have to properly respect everyone. It doesn't mean, well, actually in the Uddhava Gita, Kṛṣṇa says you can bow down to even dogs and everything. But it doesn't mean that we're offering puja to everyone all the time and stuff like that. But it means that we are understanding that they're Kṛṣṇa's parts and parcels. That's in chapter 4. What is it? Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. This knowledge of all these different sacrifices that are being recommended, sacrifices of material things and sacrifices of the senses, sensual activities, and the sacrifice. He says it ultimately culminates in knowledge that you can learn from a great spiritual master. And what is that knowledge? Yena bhūtāni sheshani drakṣasyatmanyato mayi. When you get that knowledge, that all living beings are part of me, that they're in me and they're mine, then you'll never again be bewildered by anything. That's real knowledge. When you see how the spirit souls, jivas, are parts of Kṛṣṇa, and therefore they shouldn't be harassed unnecessarily. Of course, you may have to, king has to control people. The miscreants who are harassing other people, they have to be curbed. But only the devotee can really work for the benefit of all living being. And therefore, Lord Chaitanya explains that this Sankirtan Yajna, which has arrived in this age and makes it so easy to understand Kṛṣṇa, by just chanting this, the holy name is so pure and potent, even a dim glimmer of the holy name will relieve us from our many extreme sufferings. And then when the actual holy name, pure holy name, rises in the heart, then the holy name is Kṛṣṇa itself. We have perfect Nama Gokula Mahotsavayate Kṛṣṇa Purnavapushe Namo Namaha. Rupa Goswami prays that the holy name is like a great festival for Gokula, and it's the full manifestation of Kṛṣṇa itself that we can appreciate. So, Lord Chaitanya says that this pushing on this Sankirtan movement is the highest welfare work for humanity. So those who actually are advanced devotees, they can actually preach. And that preaching is actually the best thing for all people, better than building dams and building roads and hospitals and all these other welfare activities. The highest welfare activity is to give people the chance to chant Hare Krishna properly and understand Bhagavad-Gita properly. And so we have one more minute. I want somebody else to say something besides Jagarini, or I'll feel like I'm a complete failure. I see you smiling there in your green shirt. What do you say? What do you think? I'm putting you on the spot. Can you understand? Aap Angrezi bolte hain? This is the English Bhagavad. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Huh? और बोलो अंग्रेजी बोलो.
Very best class.
Thank you.
Nice.
But I'm glad to hear that. I saw you smiling. I know you got it. And you, Sir Brahmachari in the back, I know you know everything already. What can you share something?
No, okay.
That's it? Just okay? Say one thing about Kṛṣṇa that will enlighten us. Am I being too mean? Okay. Kṛṣṇa is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has an eternal, transcendental, blissful form that's full of bliss, knowledge, and eternality. Okay, Hare Krishna, Srimad Bhagavad-Gita ki jai.
Really.